So there's that for you.
Awesome.
They're done.
Yeah. But I only said speech therapy. I just have said I am
pretty
not
much-
doing anything but speech.
I finally got to the point where I only did like.
Are you speech
recovery
therapist?
title. Yeah.
Okay. And I just retired in June.
Oh.
And so I've signed up for every class. So that's why you see me and everything, but you must do. I don't have. I just
She
think
is,
because you're always there.
Did you do Marcia, did you do online, another country?
Yes.
Last week? No, was it online? Italy?
Let me text you.
Don't you forget? I slept through Jordan. Did you go?
I didn't, I couldn't go because I was.
I almost came to something yesterday that's not till next week.
I had a conflict. I can't remember what it was.
You I know painting.
I'm 30.
Painting.
Yes.
Aloha,
Aloha.
good people.
Hola.
Speaking of coming to things that's not till next week, I canceled something that I thought was last Friday, but it wasn't till this Friday. So she's like, we're really not scheduled until the next Friday. So I was like, oh, I mean, I just let you know I'm gonna be there.
That's what I call very good.
Hello, folks afar, our online folks. In your own homes and wherever you might be. It's great to have people here today. And so we're going to kind of continue what we started last week. And last week we were talking about making relatives with those of us, those of our family who are in the LGBTQ plus queer Two Spirit community. And we worked a little bit, and we'll review that. So I won't even get into that. So, so today we're creating an inclusive environment for our Two Spirit and LGBTQ plus community. Like I said last week, if you're new this week, Mark Daniels is my name. I also list my tribal affiliations, and I don't know if you know this story. I used to be in the chair of the Department of American Indian Studies here for a while. But almost every tribe, the name you probably know them by is not the name they know themselves by. It's often, so I mean, most commonly, like we might refer to Sioux people, right? And you might hear terms like Lakota or Dakota, Nakota, or sometimes you hear the Ocheti Shakui, which is the 7 council fires, which is really, those are the names that are used within the language. That name Lakota, Dakota, Nakota means ally, and those are like different dialects of that same language. And so they differ by those letters, L, D, and N. So like the word eagle, you might know that word in Lakota is Wombly. There's a town in South Dakota called Wombly, right? And so in Dakota, that's going to be Wamdi and Wamni. So anyway, and so when I say Ho-Chunk, Dene, and Newts, anybody know what Ho-Chunk? What one you might hear more commonly? Think RV.
Our vehicle?
Winnebago.
Yeah, Winnebago. So Winnebago tribe, I think Winnebago means the stinking people or something like that. And, you know, apparently there was a time that we lived in near a lake that stunk. And so that might have been the way what, you know, a rival tribe called us. You know, the Sioux's an interesting one. I don't know if you've heard that. The French fur traders were coming down into what's now Minnesota, and they asked the Dakotas, you know, who are your neighbors over here? Or no, they asked the Ojibways, who are your neighbors over here? And they said, oh, that's the Sioux. So you get this French spelling of an Ojibwe word that means like stinking people, or the snakes, the small snakes or the little snakes. And so, but you know, that's what gets known in the dominant culture, and so sort of gets addressed that way. So Ho-Chunk, yeah, Winnebago, Dene, anybody know that one?
No.
Yeah, Navajo, right. And you'll see that one used a lot too, because some of the Alaska tribes and others too have some of the same roots. And Nooch, that one's probably gonna if you know what state I'm from,
Utah.
and that's close, that's the Ute tribe or the Northern Utes. You went to Utes,
Oh.
or the Running Utes, right? That's what the University of Utah,
Oh.
they're one of two universities that still uses a native name and has the permission of the tribe there to do that, but they don't use they don't have a white guy on a horse at halftime coming out dressed up like a native person. And they actually, at halftime, some of the games, they'll have, they'll do some informational things. They might have powwow dancers out or talk about, heritage and customs and things like that. So I don't know. That's probably still not my preference, but it seems better than, having the fighting Sioux or something like that. So, all right, one of these buttons is the one I push. I think it's that one. Once again, I want to make sure we acknowledge this land that we're on, this land that's, indigenous land. And we know the Omahas or the Omaha, that's how you most often would hear that tribe is Omaha. And the one that we just talked about, the Oceti Shakopee people, the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, but other native people have lived here too. So we want to recognize this land and always sort of have a sense of that. So you might remember last time we talked about Two Spirit people, LGBTQ relatives, and sometimes even use the word queer, which some of you I still see cringing at when I use that term. And so here's some of the powwows that were had in the last couple of years. And that's Monty, who was the royalty at the first inaugural Two Spirit Wachipi in Sioux Falls, and my son Dylan next to him. And Dylan was part of the planning committee for that one and the one that followed it too. Disclosure is the same as last time. There's no particular financial interests I have or relationships to disclose. I'm a member of the Society of Indian Psychologists and of the WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And I'm on the board of directors for the Transformation Project. And actually I brought, for this group here, I brought some Transforming South Dakota magazines. I would love to distribute them to others if there's a way we can do that. I have enough to get out to others. So, if anyone's aware of how we can get them out to other people.
You can just put them on the table when you go out to the parking lot. There's a table there. You can put some of them there and people.
Well, I'm just thinking the people who are online, who are in Sioux Falls and other parts of the state.
Well, I
Yeah,
can't
so,
help with that.
yeah. Mitakyase, you might know that terminology. That's in the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota ways. We end all prayers and sort of sacred events with that terminology, that we're all related, or all my relatives. And that's sort of the world view perspective, is that we're all connected and related, and we is beyond just us humans, but all things that are. Yeah.
Last week, I just, because I keep taking pictures, we talked about you sending these slides maybe to us?
Yes,
And that's gonna happen.
and it is.
Then I'll quit taking pictures.
Oh, right. So just realize I'm on the 1 week delay program.
That's fine. That's just fine. That's just fine.
There's some things I do really well, and there's some things I don't. And like being on
Right.
time is one of
That's
those.
just fine.
And our objectives today, we're gonna definitely do number one, and we might get into number two. We'll just kind of see where we're at time-wise. But number one is sort of the central one, and number two is is maybe an illustration of that in some way. So create a Two Spirit and LGBTQ plus affirming and supportive community. What can we do to do that? And then we can look at South Dakota Urban Indian Health's initiatives and visions over the last couple of years, things they've put down both as goals and then started to realize in their care for Native people and Two-Spirit people there. A beloved sign of our families there. And once again, I start with that same acknowledgement and invitation. The acknowledgement is, you know, I speak as an advocate and an ally, but I am not a Two-Spirit person. I'm not a person in a queer LGBTQ plus person. So, you know, there are definitely holes in my experience and things that you won't get from me that you might get from someone who lives in those ways. So, and secondly, you know, I reaffirm that invitation to open your hearts and your heads to discuss these things. And I felt like we really did that last time. Sometimes there were some rough edges that we looked at and talked about. And let's continue that discussion. Really, I feel free to ask any question you want, you know, as long as we're respectful in here. I think it's fair to ask anything and that we can address any issues. And once again, I want to remind you of that concept of, you know, imagining less kind of binary ways of understanding it, you know, male, female, straight, gay, and imagining that there's really lots of ways, even with our physical sex, you know, there's lots of ways that we can look and be. And so I always think this photograph helps us kind of imagine that a little better. I see there's a chat, so let me just jump up to that if I can remember how to do it. I think I'm gonna switch gears here. Scroll down or something. Okay. It's starting, Lawrence, so.
It started.
Can they hear it?
Yeah, it could be you.
It maybe was just a little late starting, so they.
Yeah, I didn't see what time. Yeah, we were a few minutes behind.
Okay.
Okay, come on. Oh yeah, this didn't, why did this not work last time after I did that? Well, I do it over here. There. Is that the next one? I hope it was. Okay, it's working out. So I want to just quickly review again. We went through this kind of piece by piece last time where we looked at these 3 different areas that often get confused and we first looked at, you know, sort of biological or physiological sex, and we talked about female or assigned female at birth, male, assigned male at birth, and we also talked about some people who are intersex, about 2 to 4%, who don't fit neatly into those binary packages of what either a male or a female look like. And for some of them, decisions are made when they're young to have them present either as male or female. Sometimes those don't involve any surgery, sometimes they do. And some people, interestingly, don't know until later in their life because it's more in their chromosomes and other areas like that that are not so visible that they might be intersex. We talked too, if we go to the gender, up to that corner, gender identity. We talked about cisgender or cis. Do you remember what that means? Anybody?
Same. I mean, you're what you were at birth.
Yeah, same as you know, you were assigned at birth.
Yeah.
Trans, there's 2 meanings of that. So can you remember either of those meanings? If you remember either of the meanings for trans, yeah.
Across from.
Awesome, yeah. So the one is the same as and the other's across from. So, you know, I was assigned, say I was assigned male at birth, but I identify as a female. So I'd be a transgender woman or transgender girl across from. Do you remember the other definition of transgender?
It has to do with the big T and the little t, but I'm a little confused by that part. I might need to go there.
So you remember that slide in the last one was an umbrella, if you remember seeing that. And it's an umbrella term that really might refer to anyone who's over here, who's not cisgender, anyone who identifies differently than the way they were assigned at birth. So sometimes it's used as a term for anyone, whether they're non-binary, whether they're a trans man, trans woman, whatever terminology they might be using, they don't identify as a cis person. So it's that umbrella term, but then in a more specific sense, it's referring to someone in a binary sense who sees themselves across from on the other side. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that to use the term cisgender is implying a binary?
Yeah, yeah. I think even using the term transgender in one of those two definitions is implying a binary too. Yeah, yeah. And it's also, part of, I think it's the development of that term. It is a way to say these are different ways people are versus this is normal and these are abnormal ways, so it's like, let's give everybody, a label that's descriptive of who they are. Yeah, so within that you have transgender man, sometimes female to male or is used, but you don't hear that very frequently. Transgender woman, male to female, non-binary, people who don't fit really cleanly into that binary. And there's different terminologies that are used there: gender fluid, gender queer, gender expansive, and there's more. Gender non-conforming is also a term that's sometimes used for like that, the big trans umbrella, but I don't really like that term because it just seems to have a little bit of a negative energy, like you're non-conforming, like somehow you made a choice, and then there's gender expression, and you might remember some of the ways. Do you remember some of the ways gender is expressed? If you think about it, we talked about some of the ways people express their gender. We even looked at, remember I looked at the front row of people here, and does anyone remember that?
Clothing,
Oh, right.
interests,
Huh?
interests.
Yeah, interests would be that.
Clothing.
Clothing.
I'm having a Barbie party and we're all going to dress in pink and have the pink cake.
Do I get to come? No, right. So, that, I mean, conventionally that would be seen more as a female, feminine thing. So, yeah, so, the way we talk, makeup, hair,
Yeah.
even the way we might walk, the clothes we wear, the shoes we wear, or that we don't wear. So all those things are part of our gender expression. And there's kind of, to help us sort of divide things a little bit, which is helpful for us organizationally in our brains. We think of feminine or femme, and we think of masculine, and butch is another way, and androgynous or other, terms that people might use for things that don't, like you look at someone and you might say, oh, I don't know. I was thinking, do you know who Tracy Chapman is?
Yes.
Remember her?
Yes.
First time I ever saw her sing or heard her, I think it was a free Nelson Mandela concert, maybe out of London or someplace like that. And she got up there and I had no idea if she was a male or a female. Her voice, in my eyes, I couldn't tell the difference. And then what's her name? Tracy, right? So it's like, oh, that's a lot of help, right? So
Could be any.
She was born with that.
yeah, so so that's the gender component of things. Then we look at the attraction piece, and you remember the attraction is sort of can be divided into a couple of areas: sexual attraction and romantic attraction, and they really sort of parallel each other. And you have kind of gay or lesbian, You have straight, you have bisexual or biromantic, and then, you know, pansexual, we talked about, you might remember that term that's even more broad than bi, because bisexual sort of refers to a binary, right? Now we're saying, oh, there's people who exist outside of the binary, right? And so pan is that idea that you could be attracted to sort of anyone. Oh, I didn't correct it, dang it. I was gonna do that too. The person who helped us see that last time, the scolioromantic or scoliosexual. You remember the term she said that she used? God, I looked it up too. I just never put it in. I gotta remember to do that though. I wanna, yeah, so there's another term that she's better. So scoliosexual means someone who's attracted to trans or non-binary people. And then aromantic or asexual. And even, you know, a term like asexual can have lots of meanings. There's divisions of that. You know, some people who are asexual don't ever want to have sexual contact with anyone. Some aren't necessarily uninterested in sex, but they want to have very strong emotional ties with someone before they have sexual attraction to them. And so those are our sexual orientation. And you might remember too. So if you think of sex at the bottom of the triangle, that's once again my sort of graphic, but that's kind of what's between your legs in a sense. Your gender is how you see yourself, right? I see myself as a man or as a woman or as a non-binary person or as a two-spirit person. And attraction is who is it that I'm attracted to, you know, both romantically and sexually. And so those three are really, they're related, but they are independent areas, kind of, sort of, mostly. Just that some of the sex, well, you know, gender, when people have gender affirming surgeries and procedures, that, you know, that's also dealing with some of the sex piece of things too. So, any questions on either end about that? The other thing, what do I have to do to get that last? Any questions though about any of those ideas or concepts? There's me and my, oh, I could have worn that today. I've got a progressive flag shirt. So that was at the Two Spirit powwow. That was at the, what's that called in Sioux City? It's like the Culture Center, maybe they call that. And these were some people from the Transformation Project who were helping make fry bread and serve the people. And the Transformation Project, as an assistant sort of fundraiser, provided food at the powwow, and then all the proceeds went to the next Two Spirit powwow. You might remember too, our gender fry bread person, and really that's kind of the same concepts, those three main areas. You know, you see the gender identity and gender expression. You see the attraction, you know, the physical or sexual attraction and emotional attraction. And then you see the sex assigned at birth. And what I love too, whatever your sex, gender identity, expression or attraction, you're exactly as you are. That idea that we are just who we are, however it is we come into this remarkable space. And that's what I love so much about the idea of the rainbow, is because really, even though the LGBTQ, that's used a lot to represent that. I mean, it really is representative of so much more to me than that, of all the rich and beautiful ways that we're different and similar. So let's jump into today's discussion. And I really would encourage you to speak up as we go. Let's make this a conversation. Let's talk about things. This is a term I came across called CARES. So what to do for Two Spirit and LGBTQ plus individuals and their families. And we're going to really explore all of these areas, but community support and advocating is a really critical one. Affirming the experience, not pathologizing it. And I actually put a new slide in, maybe it's next, I can't remember where I put it in, but that looks a little bit at the American or the DSM, the DSM system. Do you know that? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So that's what mental health people use to diagnose mental health disorders. And we'll look just kind of briefly at the history there and see how over the course of, probably what's it been, about 60 or 70 years now, things have changed as they relate to LGBTQ plus people. So, you know, the importance too of getting people to the necessary resources they need. You know, some people don't need any resources. They're set, they got what they need. Some people really benefit from resources. The transformation project's a resource. Good medical care. I mean, we all need good medical care, but good care for trans and other related issues, and education for individual and family, because this is an area that it's an interesting area. I mean, if we looked at the big arch of human history, and we look at, you know, the cultures of the world, people have been talking about these issues throughout human history. But in our Western culture, you know, they haven't been, they sort of taken a back seat for a long time. Is that in here that we're getting this sound? That my
I think
phone
Marcy.
calling? Huh?
Marcy, is that your phone?
My phone is ringing in my car.
Oh, okay.
It's in her car.
Oh.
It's in her
Yeah.
car.
Or it's right there. We can hear it right there. We hear something. Maybe it's from your
It's
ear.
my hearing aids. But
Oh,
I didn't realize it was so.
you were singing, huh?
Their hearing aids are attached to my cell phone, but my
Right.
cell phone's in the car.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, we just heard this music and I thought, you know, I was about ready to start dancing, but. And, you know, another piece of that, as we were talking, is to stabilize other mental health and medical conditions, because as we'll talk about a little more in deep depth when we look at mental health briefly, there is no diagnosis for someone who is transgender. That's not a disorder. It's not a problem. It's not a problem if you're gay. It's not a, but if you're gay or transgender or straight or whatever your identity, it's common that we have mental health and physical health issues, right? So we need to make sure those issues are getting properly treated. And just an aside, but the LGBTQ plus people in general seek less healthcare than non-LGBTQ plus people, and trans people even more so, using the big umbrella term of trans, because for many, there's a lot of dysphoria about one's own body. And then if you go in and they call you he when you're using she, they use a name that's not the name you use. And sometimes some providers are not very educated in this area. And so a lot of people don't get the care they need because of their concerns of coming into a clinic or a hospital or something like that. So yeah, so this is one I just added today. But this kind of gives you an idea of how, and I use the language they used in this, in the article, LGBT, but in the first Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that's what the DSM stands for, and from 1952. So we're talking, what, 70 years now. Homosexuality is listed as a sociopathic personality disturbance. In the second one that comes out 16 years later, it continues to be listed as a mental disorder. Then it's updated in that second one about 6 years later, and it's not listed as a category of disorder, and the diagnosis is replaced with the category of sexual orientation disturbance. So, but still seen as some problematic areas. In 1980, the DSM-3, I think that's the first one I used when I came into training, was that. And so there's a diagnosis of ego-dystonic homosexuality, replaces what was in the DSM-2. And it introduces gender identity disorder. It might have even been called, in the first one, I think it was called maybe transsexualism or something along those lines, I think was the terminology that was used. And then when they revised that third edition in '87, they removed the reference to the ego-dystonic homosexuality and replaced it with sexual disorder not otherwise specified, which could include persistent and marked distress about one's sexual orientation. And you could see why it would be easy to have persistent and marked distress about your sexual orientation if you're in a, welcome, come and join us. If you're in a culture that doesn't accept that, well, you know, that you might have that. And then the DSM-5 in the transgender or transsexual, yeah, they don't talk about that as well here, sorry. But the transsexualism, and then they gave it gender identity disorder, I think is what it was called in the 4. The gender identity disorder is removed, and now in the current DSM-5, that's what we use now. There's no reference to gender identity disorder. There is what's called gender dysphoria, and that terminology is describes someone who's distressed by their body, by the cultural acceptance, and a number of other areas. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. It's just that they have distress around that. And I know a lot of the trans folks I work with, you know, there's a lot of distress about their physical bodies because they don't match well with how they see and envision themselves. And, you know, and even though there are some operations and things that can assist with that, one, they can be really costly, and we're kind of in a transition area where insurance says some will accept some of those, some won't. And so, you know, even though there might be ways to resolve some of those issues, they may not have access to those resolutions. But anyway, that just gives you a quick look at in mental health in our country, the way we talk about the diagnostic and statistical manual that's used to diagnose disorders, how it's kind of shifted and changed over the years. So the question is, what can I do? And we're going to look at a couple of different, and we're going to repeat some things. They're going to come up more than once because I'm going to use a couple of different sources and stuff. But the first is that we take personal responsibility to learn about these things, you know, and you all here is exactly doing that. That's what's really awesome. I mean, you're right on the front lines of like trying to educate yourself about these sort of things. And so 3 points here: be open to acknowledging what you don't know and find informed and accurate resources. And that's an easy one because what happens, you know, sort of like when you learn anything new, right? You kind of learn the more surface stuff, and then you sort of make assumptions based on that. And sometimes those assumptions aren't accurate, you know, and so, and I think when we look at, you know, gender identity, sexual orientation, some of those issues, even though there's sort of some general, maybe we'll call them, I don't know if rules is the best terminology, but ways of understanding things, it's always really important to check in with people because not everyone matches the sort of rules, right? And so we'll kind of look at that a little more as we go. The question, what do you believe about Two Spirit and LGBTQ plus individuals? That's really an important one. When you think of that in your own existence, you know, have you had an opportunity to have relationships with someone who identifies that way? Or, you know, do you more identify with someone you saw on a, you know, like a TV program? What's her name? Yeah, she's a teenager now. She's had a show, maybe she's still on TV. Jazz, is that her name? Jazz, yeah. I can't think of her last name, but she's had a whole, you know, show that plays on TV, weekly series that's kind of followed her journey. And then you have, I can't think of her. Oh, you have the Laverne Cox. Do you know who Laverne Cox is? If you ever watched, what's the prison show? Women's prison. Orange is the New Black. And Laverne Cox is in that. She's been a huge spokeswoman for transgender issues. And there's I think it's on, oh, how come I can't think of, where was the old place we would always go to get movies, the first online place? You used to pay $9.99 a month. And now it's about double that. Oh, what's the first one? We used to, and still is out there. But anyway, on that place, because they also do some,
He said online.
huh?
Not blockbusters.
Not online.
Yeah, online or, you know, what do you call it? It flows through your computer kind of.
Streaming?
Huh?
Netflix.
Netflix, there's the one. I'm looking
Oh.
at. Yeah, on Netflix, I think it is. And I wish I could remember what the name, there's a wonderful documentary that Laverne Cox plays a huge role in, I think, at different levels in terms of producing and is in it and stuff, that looks at the role of transgender people in Hollywood, in theater. And it's really a beautiful examination of that. But yeah, so, you know, we get different kinds of exposure, you know, maybe your exposure was, you know, the Rocky Horror Picture Show or something like that, you know, because, you know, trans people have been present in lots of different ways. The last one is, how does that present in your personal life or in your relationships or in the organizations that you're a part of, you know, these belief systems? And so, you know, of course, one place where there's it's a really vocal place where there's pretty divergent views is if you think of our religious or organized religion experience, you know. And so you could go to different places in this town that might all call themselves Christian places, you know, have the same Bible, use that same thing, and it will have really differing viewpoints about LGBTQ plus people in general. And if you attended any, what was that, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we had the school board meetings and they were changing their policies, you had voices from all of those different communities. So, all right, so we're going to continue this. And part of this is understanding your biases, not only the ones you're aware of, but the ones you're not aware of, right? That's always really important. You know, what's going on underneath stuff for us. I think the second one's really important. What do you think that one means as you read that? Understand the importance of intersectionality and how it impacts LGBTQ plus and Two Spirit individuals and communities. Any idea what that? What do you think intersectionality means? Any, yeah,
I don't know.
okay.
I don't know.
You've confessed it.
Yeah, I confessed.
Well, intersectionality is you think of all the ways people are marginalized, right? And so think of where being part of the queer community might intersect with other ways of being marginalized, you know, if you're poor, if you're a person of color, you know, whatever, you know, religious ways, those sort of things. And that's really an interesting one too, because if you, you know, it's probably the person who's most likely to be killed in our country is a person of color who's a transgender woman. I mean, just astronomically high rates of murder among that group of people. We had one in our state about a year and a half, 2 years ago in Rapid City. An Indigenous woman who was killed there. And it's fine. I just heard on the news, you know, this much later that they're maybe going to have some charges and against, you know, the person who killed her and stuff. So, but yeah, that's a really dangerous person to be. And just in general, you know, being a queer person, it is more dangerous than not. And so you think of, you know, those things, you know, once again, going back to, you know, even in our spiritual places, some places in our town. I mean, if you're a Methodist, for example, I don't know what you know, if any of you are Methodists, right? You know, I mean, Methodist church is about split 50-50. I mean, they're literally splitting in half because half the people don't want to, in a sense, support LGBTQ plus community, don't want their pastors to be that, don't want to marry people who come in those ways. And the other half do want to. And in our town, the church there is very affirming and supportive and has been for years and years and years. I remember Jordan, I forget his last name, he's the pastor there. And when he took over a couple of years ago, he invited me out to coffee and we were talking, and he was interesting. He said, I don't even like to gender God, you know, so you think of that. I mean, you know, it's very common in a Christian way that we would call God Heavenly Father, right? Or some sort of thing like that. So I thought, wow, that's a pretty interesting and pretty bold way to approach things. So, and then we think, you know, also, what are the experiences of those in your family, friend, and community circle, you know? And I think that's really important. I don't know, does anyone in here have relatives who present queer in some way, or trans, or Two Spirit in any way that you're aware of?
Well, I don't have a relative, but we had an experience in our family that our daughter Linda was good friends with her friend in high school. They were graduated together and they were in confirmation together. And we always thought he was feminine, but they went trick-or-treating. It's a big joke. They went trick-or-treating as an old man and old lady, and people didn't recognize him. It's always a joke about Halloween. And I don't ever remember her older sister, her younger sister, making a remark about him, that they didn't accept him. And this was over 30 years ago. This is the way, and when he married, he sent us an announcement of his wedding. I mean, this is just the way it is. I don't know if, I think other families who knew him were as accepting as we were. This is, it was I don't ever remember bad comments. His mom was a friend of mine.
You said, you used the term confirmation, so that would say you were probably in a church at that time? Do you
Oh,
mind sharing what
yes,
church that was?
Yes,
What church were you part of? Or are you part of?
Trinity Lutheran.
Okay, and at Trinity, are they pretty open to?
Oh, yes, yes.
Is that the one up north of Prentice Park?
Yes,
Okay, yeah, because I know they participated in at the end of Pride Week in Vermillion, which I think we've done for like 4 or 5 years.
I wasn't able to go for some reason, but.
Yeah, but they have
had
a
service in the
like
park.
interdenominational service, and they're one of 3 or 4 who always come and present. Yeah.
Yeah, he comes back and he lives in California. I think he has a husband. I can't remember which way it is. But he's welcome to come back to Trinity. Everybody accepts him.
Mm. That's awesome. In my eyes, that's really cool. That's great.
I mean, he just grew up in our family with our children and with the other high school students.
Yeah.
And then he went on to seminary.
Mm. Wow.
On to seminary. He's a Lutheran pastor.
Yeah. Oh, really? He's a Lutheran pastor?
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
In
That's-
California.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that
Yeah.
that's allowed. So, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those experiences, Yeah.
Again, I don't, but my daughter she's recently become the youth director, talking about Methodist Church in Sioux Falls at Asbury. And that is another one of the churches that's a very strongly accepting church. In fact, Jordan has subbed up there sometimes.
Oh, huh?
Her middle school, high school youth group, what does she call them? A gender bending something little group of whatever. I mean, it is just, some of one of their pastors, both of the pastors' kids are trans, I believe. I think one's gay and one's trans,
Mm.
and they are helping to lead this group. And she said it's just she just loves it. She just thinks it's very fun.
Yeah.
So it's very strong there. That's
Wow.
a very accepting church.
One sort of like we were talking about last time too, there seems to be a real kind of evolution in the way youth talk about this these days, when you sort of take away all these kind of boundaries and confines, people have different ways of understanding themselves and how they connect to others, both their own identity and who they're attracted to and those sort of things. So.
Well, Trinity had, this was years ago, when there was whether or not we would accept pastors who were, I don't know, one of these words.
Yeah, like gay or something, or yeah.
And there were many people in congregations who left the ELC, just like.
Right, the Methodist.
Yes, like.
Big split, yeah.
But I know one of our members, when I was on the council, he came to the council meeting and said, I don't like what's going on, I'm leaving. And he went to Concordia, his wife stayed at Trinity.
Oh, wow.
And then his funeral was at Concordia, but he wanted the organist from Trinity to play his funeral. Concordia.
There's no gay songs though, right? So.
You know those kids.
So it gets so complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
If it was a
Well,
few years ago, I
What?
think the organist at Trinity was gay, so.
Just not the whole setup.
That's funny.
It's interesting. Oh, do you think she was gay?
Talking about someone else.
That's funny.
I've got someone.
But he
else in mind.
specifically wanted her to play. And then it was a big decision whether Concordia would let her come in and play.
Oh, for
I'm
goodness
not
sake.
outing a female
What a crazy
organist. I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Well, and you see this really in families. I remember it was at the Methodist church, and it was the first year they did the Vermilion Pride, because the university had been having it for years, you know, but as a community, we had it, and I think that was maybe in 2019 or something. And then they had the Methodists, the Lutherans, and UCC, and they were supposed to do the service in the park,
Oh,
but it
yeah.
was raining a little bit, so they did it at the Methodist church. And the first thing that was really stunning, because I hadn't been in that church in a long time, was to walk into the church, and behind the pulpit were 6 doors, like the doors like those, painted the 6 colors of the rainbow. And it said, I can't remember, they're still there. They say something like, God sees all colors, or I don't know, some, you know, very welcoming thing. And, but during that service, I think there were 3 or 4 members of the LGBTQ plus community who spoke. And told their stories, and they were horrible stories. I mean, they talked about their own families and their churches, you know, ostracizing them, telling them they were sinners, that they were wicked, that they were evil, and you know, they had walked that journey, and they were in a time in their lives where they had found peace with themselves and had found religious communities that they could be part of, that were accepting, and so, you know, they ended in a good way, but it was really hard to hear those stories, you know.
And
And
I attended that service.
oh, you remember that one? Yeah,
Yes,
wasn't that?
yes.
Yeah, and it was, and so, you know, it's like, and I mean, you see that, and you've seen that more historically when, you know, a kid was gay or something and would be rejected maybe by their family, their religion, you know, growing up in Utah with a giant population of Mormons that aren't very friendly to LGBTQ people. Don't, you know, saw that all the time. And you see, you know, it's interesting. There are parent groups in Utah that are Mormon parent groups, like the Dragon Moms and the Dragon Dads, who say, we've got kids who are LGBTQ plus, and we're not gonna, you know, one of the fundamental beliefs in this church is to take care of our families, and you're asking us to, you know, somehow to reject them and stuff. So yeah, so it's really interesting when we look in our circles, you know, when we look here, you know, I think one of the things we'll talk about later is even bathrooms. Because having very gendered bathrooms can really be inhibiting to trans folks, because they're not sure if they're going to get beat up or what's going to happen and so people won't use the bathroom, and they'll organize their whole life around not being able to use the bathroom. And I remember making a request here several years ago, and I don't know if you've seen the restrooms, but I think other than the big ones in the back, which are part of the newer building, the other ones are all gender neutral bathrooms. And even next to the big ones in the back, it says there are gender neutral bathrooms if you want to use those, you know. So it's really cool to see organizations respond to that when you make requests and when they can understand the need for that. So interestingly, I don't know if any of you were a part of any of you Vermilion people, but like I said, about 2 years ago, there was a student at the
Jolly.
is that the youngest one? Jolly?
No.
Austin. There was an Austin student, and when she was in kindergarten, they told her, this trans girl, just use the nurse's bathroom.
Right.
And she did that for a whole year. But she noticed that they would tell her, like, oh, just lie and say you're sick. Adults are telling her to do these strategies, right? Because when they leave the classroom, all the other kids go this way,
Yeah.
and she goes that way.
Yeah.
And so she dealt with it for a year, but the second year, when she was in first grade, she told her parents she didn't
Right.
want to do that anymore. And I really appreciated them. They really listened to her. They didn't try to push an agenda unless it was important to her too. But then they talked to the principal, and the principal said, well, we don't have a written policy, but sort of the existing policy is that people who were assigned male at birth go to the boys and assigned female at birth go to the girls. And if we want to change that, you'd have to go up the ladder. So that she finally, the family finally went to the superintendent and then the board. And they started talking about that there, and I don't know, it probably lasted 2 or 3 months.
Can't leave.
And there were a lot of testimonies and people giving viewpoints. And the board drafted new policies. And what was interesting, they became much bigger than a bathroom policy and included things like, you know, sleepovers when people are out on the road for, you know, debate team or something like that.
Did they get that solved? That
So,
traveling one? I didn't. know
yeah,
that
so
that
what
had been
happened is the board got a hold of some Iowa school who had been doing this for a couple of years and sort of used that as a template. And that's why it became a lot more expansive about use of pronouns and names and all of those kind of things became a part of it, which was really cool. I mean, and there were a few pieces that were sort of put on hold because they weren't quite clear on how to make them happen and stuff. But so from what I understand, you know, there's a new elementary being built right now next to the middle school, and it's going to have non-gendered bathrooms. It's just going to have a bathroom that has individual lock stalls for each person and then a common wash area.
I've seen those like in an airport where they have, it's, you know, built all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom.
Mhm.
So, you know, you can't sneak under there or anything, but they're all individual. like,
Stalls or
little
whatever.
rooms. Yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah.
Hey, can
The
we
men
have
and
the
women
cackling
both
down
live
back there? Just giving you a hard, I'm sorry.
So men and women both go in there.
Mhm. And probably
It's fun.
non-binary people and all kinds of people do, you know, I mean, yeah, but right, you know, and you know, there are plenty of countries in the world who don't have very binary systems, you know, so there are plenty who do too, there's no doubt about that, but and so yeah, that's I mean, one of the concerns about that is if they're kind of sealed top to bottom,
Mhm.
they might be smoking or having
Right.
sex in there too. So,
Right.
you know, so
Doing
school
drugs.
personnel are kind of trying to manage a handful of different concerns while they're doing that. So I don't really know what they're going to look like exactly, or if there's going to be, you know, what kind of access, if any, to those rooms. But, you know, but still a pretty simple solution, you know, that still provides privacy. You know, probably the main concern I heard raised over and over again by people who were against trans people using the bathroom, you know, that fit with their identity, was that they were afraid that what they called boys, transgender girls, were going to come in and molest other girls. And, you know, if you look at the data in any of that, trans people are so much more likely to get sexually molested and stuff than to be perpetrators of that. So, and of course, they always call them boys, right? They don't, you know, oh, a bunch of boys just want to put wigs on and dress up and, you know, do that. And I mean, sort of like the same thing with athletics, like, you know, oh, the boys basketball team's going to go all dress up like girls so they can win a state championship or something, you know. I mean, if you know boys like I know boys, that's usually not an area that a lot of boys, you know, cisgender boys want to go to. Anyway,
Mark, the doors say God's doors are open to all at the Methodist Church.
is that what it is? Oh, yeah, that's awesome. So I think we're gonna repaint them. I've just been hanging out there a little bit, but someone wants to do the progressive flag. Do you know what flag that is? So that's the one, if you saw that shirt I was wearing, it has kind of a chevron like this with the trans colors, the blue and the pink and the white. And then it has the rainbow colors as stripes, including a brown and a black for people of color. So. Yeah, that was a pretty amazing thing to me, though. Like, that was not in any Mormon church I was ever in. There was not a social justice choir. There was not,
Don't you think Vermilion's more progressive than about any other town though in South Dakota because it's a university town and the bathroom situation? I mean, I think the policy, the Vermilion School bathroom policy is ahead of their time.
Sure.
Yes.
think so.
That bathroom policy probably also generated some laws that would outlaw it. I mean, when it was happening here, then there seemed to be more intensity to create laws in our state that would not allow that sort of thing to happen, so.
Just being in the school system up until here in June, it's nauseating. I mean, it is very stressful. You would think that it would be that way, and then when you say, so it just seems like such an easy solution. You're like, wow, man, we'll just have these, and you think logically, as did I, oh, that's easy enough. The arguments against it, the venom that you would hear the opposite side, and like you said, that would create those laws surface to prevent it and to make sure the other side are just huge. And I suppose that's normal. I suppose when you have one side grows that way, you're gonna have the opposite. That happens like that, but it is difficult to hear. It is difficult to be around. It is difficult to sit and listen to the kind of arguments that would say, oh, we can't have those door to floor to ceiling doors because God knows what's happening in there. So no, I don't know who those transgender people think they are, thinking they should have that because they're just gonna let all kinds of things happen. And it became just full of vitriol. It was just very difficult to hear. But maybe in the grand scheme of things, it just goes to get there, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, there were some not very nice articles in the newspaper also.
Yeah.
I mean,
But you're right. That was also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these,
really a heated debate.
Bathrooms, though, traditionally in school systems have been a place for kids to take advantage of other kids. I mean,
Oh,
it's
right,
just
yeah,
happened
bullying
over
places.
the years, and if you have a door that can be locked and it's complete, I can see how people would be concerned, because
sure, right.
maybe they had their head dunked in the toilet when they were a kid or something,
Or
Yeah,
just
I
a
don't-
little bit open so you could yell maybe for
yeah,
God's
something.
sake. I
There ought to
mean,
be a way to handle it, but I'm saying that.
yeah.
people
And I
can't
know
let-
that having a sink in there was one of the things that happened. Originally, they talked about each one of them having their own sink, and then they were like, well, that is a huge cost issue for one thing. And so then they're like, well, that doesn't even make any sense. Put the sink out. And they're like, so we can't do it. Well, yes, you can. You just put the sinks out here and you can still do that and and besides that way, that should lessen the amount of time in there anyway. So I don't know.
As we all know, a lot of people have got pregnant in sinks like that. So.
It happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are fair questions about those things that we need to look at, right? Because things do happen behind doors and administrators need to be thinking about those things. And that's why it's also useful to talk to places, if it's already been done somewhere, to see what kind of precautions they've taken or measures they've taken to help alleviate some of those issues. So one area too is to think of your own online presence. What organizations are you part of? How do you express your support? We think of living spaces and community spaces. What do you see? Like, I think of, I work at the clinic, Sanford Clinic, and, so there's been a lot of effort over the last several years to have more people of color represented in imagery, the brochures, the workforce and other things, you know, how do we do that with LGBTQ plus people? You know, how do we create spaces where people can see themselves in those spaces and feel some safety there, you know? And so you think of magazines, the decorations, the bathroom signs, the art, photos. And, you know, it's been interesting. I think I already told you about when I was approached the Twin Theaters. Also a few years, I was kind of on this kick of, you know, hearing kids tell me they wouldn't go to the bathroom because they were afraid. And so, you know, when I spoke to them and, oh, what's her name? Shannon, you know, Shannon who's over there, and Shannon, I said, you know, I noticed even for practical reasons, it makes sense, but there's always a giant line at the women's bathroom and often empty men's bathroom. If you make those, you know, where they're not gendered, then people can use both of those and just take turns, right? And they did that. So if you go over there, they say restroom on them. They used to say men's and women's restroom there. And
Where are you talking?
at the Coyote Twin Theater.
Oh.
Yeah. And here also at the UCC church, I asked that same thing there, and Steve Miller at the time said he would take it to the, you know, whoever the important people are who make those decisions, and they did that. So if you go downstairs in the UCC, and there's other bathrooms too, but you know, it's like, oh, that used to be the men's and the women's, but you can go to either one now, you know, so. And just that simple of a thing, changing a sign actually probably makes them more efficient and more welcoming, you know, so. And helps support, you know, our LGBTQ plus community. And, you know, another area you think of is like our paperwork and our electronic record system. Because a lot of times our paperwork says male, female on it. It doesn't provide other ways of expressing oneself. The electronic record system, like at Sanford, we use one that's called EPIC, that I'm sure stands for something. I bet you the E's for electric or electronic or something. Personal record, something, you know. But it's interestingly, since I've been there, it now has a place where there's a whole section in there where you can ask a person a bunch of questions. You can do an assessment on both gender identity and sexual orientation, and you can ask them, like, part of that is like, what organs, sex organs were you born with? What ones do you still have? You know, so those are really helpful for doctors too, right? Because if you're a doc or a medical care provider, you need to know that information, and the care you give a transgender man might be different than the care you give a cisgender man or a cisgender woman. And I think of my son one time going over there. You know, I work at Sanford, and my son comes in and sees one of the primary care providers, and he tells the nurse, because a term that's used. Have you ever heard of the term stealth? So stealth is a term for a trans person who looks very masculine if they're a trans man, or feminine if they're a trans woman. He looks stealth, you know, and so if the doc or the healthcare providers don't read the chart well, they might provide the wrong kind of care. And I think I remember he was there for some kind of vaginal discomfort. You know, I've got a son who has a vagina. So, and so the provider looked at him like, and so those kind of moments for someone, particularly, the more sensitive you are, the more you've been kind of beaten down, that might be a moment you don't come back to get care, right? Because you don't feel affirmed, you don't feel recognized. And so, yeah, so it's kind of cool though, in our paperwork system, we still have to use their legal name because of billing reasons, I guess, but we can put in parentheses the name that they use. And we can train our people to use that name, whatever's in parentheses. It gives us a place to put pronouns too. And so it's now training people to use that, both to put that information for people and also to be looking for that information. But just in general, you know, there's a lot of people like, how do I put myself here? Because I don't really fit in one of these two blanks here. So thinking about that.
Is there an opposite of stealth? Like how a woman would look?
Well, stealth is for a man or a woman. It doesn't matter which, but it means you present
Okay.
very strong, you know, as a trans man or trans woman.
You
Yeah.
look like
So
that.
good question. Yeah, that,
Okay.
sorry, I didn't explain that very well. But yeah, that refers to either. So there's a lot of language issues, you know, one thing that's really nice to do, and God, I wish I could get this down better myself. Sometimes I do it well, but is to introduce myself with my name and my pronouns. Why do you think that would be useful or important? Or would it be, you know? What would be an advantage?
Helps other people feel comfortable with their pronouns.
Yeah, right. So if you're a person who's a trans person and I say, oh, my name's Mark and my pronouns are he, him, you know, most likely you're going to feel like I'm going to be a welcoming person and I'm going to provide a more supportive environment for you. I used to have a badge that I wore on my lanyard that said, ask me my pronouns. I think it was a Planned Parenthood one.
Yeah, I missed that badge. I remember
It
it.
just died, you know. Badges die at some point. This one died. The badge is actually not so bad. It's the rusted pin behind it, you know, so. But, you know, those kind of things provide, you know, even this you know, this probably provides a welcoming place for a queer person, an LGBTQ person who comes in and sees, you know, me wearing this. You know, they're probably not thinking, oh, I bet that guy loves unicorns and rainbows. You know, they're probably thinking, oh, this is someone who, you know, is welcoming to the queer community. So, so I'm going to encourage you to wear rainbows all the time. I mean, I can see you would look really good in rainbows, you know, so maybe rainbow socks, you know.
I'm kind of a gray black guy.
You mix all those colors together and then you have it, right? Yeah.
So to me, it almost would make more sense for everyone to use they, them and to move away from gendering at all. But clearly that's not happening. Because in part, you know, part of me thinks that, well, gee, you know, like you're saying that, you know, identifying your pronouns is welcoming. Part of me thinks that it may be more welcoming if your pronouns were they, them.
But right now that means something else.
Yeah.
Well, but it shouldn't.
But
even
that's
introducing your
evolution.
pronouns in the mainstream sense might mean something else. Like, why in the heck are you telling me
Yeah.
you're a he, him?
Right.
When it's
Some
obvious
people
to me.
take offense to that.
All right, so that,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
That's a point, huh?
No, I mean, that's an interesting point, right? Like I told you, I think I told you that story about Dylan when I first learned about they, them pronouns. And he told me when he would go to a bar in Minneapolis, he always used they, them pronouns unless if someone then corrected him, you know, then he would shift, but that was his starting point.
Well, yeah, because that makes sense to not imply that you're making assumptions based on how someone's presenting.
Mhm.
And when I say how someone's presenting, you could think of that two ways. How you present is what you're sending out, but then there's also the element of what I'm perceiving,
Right,
you know, which is really two different things.
sure, yeah.
And it's evolving, all this.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we get to a place where that's maybe the norm, you know?
I would prefer to just not use pronouns.
You know, you say that, I
Call
forgot
people by
to,
their name.
I forgot to say that some people, you know, we were talking about you, was it you who had a person who used they, them, and someone had said Zer, that was, you know, and there are some people who say, don't use any pronouns, just use my name. You know, I've heard that request. And once again, it's a little tricky if you've grown accustomed to a
Yeah.
particular way of doing it, right?
Well,
So,
but if you're around someone who's changed the pronouns that they've used since when you first met them or something, it can be really, really difficult. And to me, a real easy solution is always call them by name. It may sound awkward, but just put the name in there because you're not gonna you're not gonna accidentally say a pronoun that someone would prefer not be used in reference to them.
It's kind of a minefield.
It's a minefield.
But then you look like,
Agree.
then you look crazy for not using pronouns,
Yeah,
but there's nothing wrong with not using pronouns other than
a flow of conversation
sounds.
get a little stilted that way too, though.
yeah, I mean, there are, you know, different strategies though. And I mean, what it really points to though is it's an evolution, it's a shift, it's a change, right? And, you know, even for the most well-meaning people, that doesn't necessarily, it's gonna mean it's gonna be even. I mean, you know, think of someone who's 29 like you, and for 29 years, you've been using a particular model. Now I'm gonna ask you to shift it, you know?
And the kids are so far ahead of us in the older generation. I mean, you know, they understand these things and first time I heard they, them, I had no idea what what.
I only see one. Yeah.
Right.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it is, because when you're a kid, I mean, that's what your daughter's seeing, right? Is you're seeing a group of kids who this is how they've always learned it, right? This is the way, and so for them, there's a fluidity, it's totally natural. And for people who haven't been exposed so much to that, it's even well-meaning people, it's a big shift. And then people who maybe who aren't well-meaning or who find offense in that for some reason, then, you know, would use those names and pronouns often in really purposefully hurtful ways, you know, with people.
You do have a few chats up there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I know, I did see that and I was gonna go to it, but I had
okay.
forgotten already, so thank you. So this, let's see, you gotta go over this. Okay, and roll up or down, we'll go, we won't miss any. Okay, so. Okay, we did that one, love that bison, thank you. Oh, there's a person who notice, she has her pronouns. I usually do that in, I think you saw in my title presentation. Whenever I do Zoom, I always have my pronouns there too.
That's the director of OLLI.
What
Yeah,
is new
yeah.
to the English teachers who've been teaching?
I know,
Or the way
right,
they used to be
no,
teaching
yeah,
the
right.
correct pronouns and,
I know,
oh, go on.
it's horrible.
Although then now the avant-garde English teachers will be teaching these things, though. This is exactly what some of them will say. Okay.
Oh,
Or,
You know, because I mean, language evolves, right? I mean, we're not speaking, you know, wherefore art thou? I mean, I sometimes do, but. You know.
yeah, or
Uh,
style books like APA style or Chicago Manual of Style or.
Yeah, even those evolve, right? I mean, APA style, every couple of years you get a new book that tells you how to do it, and
Right, what do they say now
American
about,
Indian or Native
what do they say
American,
now about pronouns?
huh?
What does APA say now about pronouns?
I haven't looked for a long time.
Well, you need to look.
Who,
I've separated myself from that world, so,
Okay,
After graduation.
okay, why do people use he, she, they, etc.? So I'm not sure with this question, I mean, because this is a good question. I have seen people who use all pronouns too. I've seen people who will give a list of she, he, they.
Oh.
You know, or some will just say any pronoun is fine with me. I don't know if that's what this person's asking, or if it's more just the kind of the discussion we've been having. Why do people use a specific pronoun different? But once again, I guess to answer that question, just in short, if it's not clear at this point, is that, if I'm born, I think of Dylan, my son again, born, it's a girl. That's, what we thought. That's how we always talked about, because Dylan has an older sister and a younger sister. We have 3 girls, called them 3D because all names start with D, but so we always use she, her, right? Until Dylan was like 21, 22 and said, I want to use they, them. And helped us understand that. And now he uses primarily he, him. He's willing to use they, that doesn't bother him, but that's just so that people don't sort of make assumptions, But it would really be weird to use she, her. And it's weird because I'm really, really good, but on some rare occasion, I'll use she, her. Often if I'm thinking about something in the past or something, but, or another interesting one for me is I used to say, and I don't know that it's not appropriate with a son, but, I would often say to my daughters, I would call them sweetie, and that seems like more of a feminine way of doing it. And I've done that before with Dylan and then felt like, ooh, I don't know if that was the right. I mean, hey, husky, So.
Well, it's interesting that you say that though, because in a heterosexual relationship, I think it'd be fairly common for a cis woman to call her partner, her male partner, sweetie,
And honey and all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been called sweetie by many waitresses.
So was that an invitation or what? Right. So, like trying to navigate those kind of things and what
I
makes
get
sense.
he and she mixed up just with, people all the time. And then I correct myself. And if you have 5 grandkids in the house, then you stop saying names, you just call them buddy.
Buddy or damn it, depending on how mad you are, right?
Everybody's buddy.
So they, them, does that have several connotations to it, or is it just represent a fluidity or what?
So they, them is the terminology that's used, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily people who identify as non-binary, and realize that could be called lots of other things, genderqueer. My observation is that's the most common pronoun that non-binary people use.
But not always.
Not always. We talked, if you might remember, some people use ze-zer. So some that I have never heard, like that are sort of newly developed ones. Some people will make up their own. Some will say only use my name. But they, them is most commonly used as a pronoun for someone who's non-binary. But like Dylan, who is a trans man, he says, I don't care if you call me they, them either. And I've said that before too, just once again. So that piece is less about what I want to be called and more about, I just don't think it's always useful for us to make assumptions about who someone is, right? From, like you said, the way I see them, because, you could look completely masculine and I could see you as masculine, and maybe that's not what the pronoun you want to use.
So would you use they, them when you're just speaking about one person?
Yeah. So that's what's crazy, huh?
Yes.
Right. But grammatically, there are instances where we've done that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
actually, we've done that, right? Yeah, so like who left their coat there?
Oh,
That's not 25 people who left their coat, that's one person. But yeah, it really is, though, it's an adjustment. Like, it's not any way I commonly use that term And now I'm really good at it. It's not problematic for me at all, but to use a singular they it's different, you know? And I wasn't even sure the first time I used it, do I use it singularly or plurally? Because I always thought, you know, the they I've learned is that you use this plural, you know, conjugation of the verb and stuff. So, yeah, so.
So if someone says, who left their coat? Nowadays, we have to assume that it's a non-binary person that left their coat.
Or either a non-binary person or any other kind of person. One of those people.
Any of
Or it might even be a dog for that matter. So, yeah, so I mean, it's interesting though, if I use that, you know, if I talk about them, them right there, you know, and I use, you know, they went to the store, they asked a bunch of questions today. You know, that's how I would talk. I have my Dylan's partner, April, uses they, them pronouns. And so I use them with them. And I sometimes say her, and I love it. My grandkid does. Papa D, them, they, and they have a big smile on their face.
Oh,
They're like really advocates, but they're sweet and kind and gentle, and they're not mean spirited at all. But then you also realize, you know, like any other group of people, you have people who've been traumatized, you have people, you know, who have different experiences. So some people really get angry if you misuse the names. Some people have lots of forgiveness. Some people, if you're trying hard, that's good, you know, I mean, yeah.
It's the use of they in the singular sense does introduce a different set of ambiguities than our typical American English in 2023 is accustomed to. But bottom line is, every language always has ambiguities. The ambiguities in one language is different than the ambiguities in others, but there's always ambiguities. You know, so it's just a matter of readjusting. And I'm really aware of it because I'm working on my Spanish.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that one of the things that was real enlightening was to realize that, oh, the patterns of ambiguity are different in different languages. You know, so now when we start changing how we're using they, that's introducing an ambiguity that wasn't there before, but it's not, the fact that there's an ambiguity is not unique.
Yeah, right.
It's in every language.
Yeah, because if I'm referring to April, my son's partner, I would say they. If I'm referring to
Then
Dylan and
collectively.
April, I would still say they, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, so, yeah, so I'm noticing it's 2:30.
Oh.
And so our time is flown by. But I don't know, I mean, more important to me than getting through this, in a sense, set of slides is this discussion we've had, because I think that's really just trying to understand, trying to figure out how to be supportive, how, you know, how that does or doesn't fit, you know, because I swear using they for a year or two was just hard for me. It really was. And then it's like, oh, it's easy for me to use it, but for me to remember it now is harder. Even, you know, so if it's with someone I'm with daily, I have a lot easier time, but if it's with someone I see less frequently, then, you know, I still, you know, the pronoun that maybe when they were born, that was the one that's going to come to me more frequently. Well, thank you all. Thank you on both ends, and hope we got to all the questions. And I know I've been encouraged by Holly, who's part of the OLLI board and stuff, to really continue this discussion next term or semester, what it is too. So we'll be continuing to look at issues as they relate to the LGBTQ and Two Spirit and queer community. So thanks,
Mark.
everybody. And just so you know, coming to I'll hand these over for you. So, or hand them out. How's that? So these are awesome. This is the second edition. We have a third edition that's out too. The third edition focuses on trans families. So this is, that's actually April, who I've been talking about right there. That's them in front of the Vermilion Area Arts Council building, that church. And this has the stories, and pictures of a number of.
Thank you.
I'll give one for you there too. A number of trans people. I think there's like 13 or 14. These pictures you've seen are actually mostly from the first edition of this. So. And if you ever think it would be useful to get another copy of one of these, let me know.
Don't forget your phone.
Yeah.
You know, if you know someone, a family who might benefit from this, please send people my direction. I should probably put my, oh, you.
No, you can still.
Oh, no, okay.
You can still type.
No, I was just gonna go to the last slide that probably has my name and
Oh.
contact info on it, so. But anyway, I have lots of these,
Called that. You're not the only one.
you know, if you've got a
Don't worry.
family who's got a trans kid or something.